Welcome to the Determined Truth Podcast.
Want the truth? You can't handle the truth.
Where we aim to explore questions of truth, the scriptures, and what it means for the church today. Here are your hosts, Rob Dalrymple and Vinnie Angelo.
Hey everyone, welcome in. We are landing the plane on Revelation, allegedly. But man, I hope your plane doesn't sound like that. You must.
This is your captain speaking. We are about to land. It's not going to be pretty. It's called a crash landing. There'll be exits on the right, on the left, and a big hole on top.
That's pretty good, actually. It's funny. So we just went to Portugal. We just got back and we flew into Lisbon, which is the mainland. Yeah. And then she has an aunt that lives in Lisbon. So we stayed there for a day. Then we flew over to the Azores Islands, which is where my father-in-law is from. And so they have their own little airlines, like Portuguese airlines that you fly. And these are planes that were they were probably old planes in 1985. And so they sold them to these Portuguese airlines. These are like the oldest 737.
They're old Spirit airplanes.
Oh, it's the Spirit. Yeah. Spirit wouldn't even want these. Yeah. And so it's one of those things you get on these old crusty planes and you're flying from Lisbon to the Azores. And it's funny because I remember this the last time I went, the whole plane claps when it lands. What?
When I was young, yeah, if I flew TWA from San Francisco to Boston or whatever,
everyone's clapping
clap when you landed. Yeah, I'm like,
yeah.
I noticed. I'm like, hey, no one's clapping anymore.
Yeah, so the whole plane is clapping, and I'm assuming it's because the plane is so rickety. We're wondering, okay,
it got there. Yeah.
Thank God we made it. But anyway,
have you seen what's the Madagascar movies?
Madagascar.
Yeah, that's what they're called, Madagascar, right?
Madagascar. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, and the first one's like. The plane, we're going to be landing in a few minutes. The bad news is we're crash landing, right? Yeah. And then it goes, all present and accounted for except for 2 people. No, that's a number I can live with.
Nice.
So,
nice.
I love that. That's one of the greatest movies there is.
Yeah, that's good.
Yep.
Why are we landing the plane? We've been in Revelation for well over a year. Took a few sidebars. But for the most
part,
has it been
that long? I thought it was
a few months. Yeah, it was a few months.
We're not going to get through this episode.
Exactly. That's the problem when we have no script. 2 ADD guys have no script, and we're gonna see how this one goes. It's just
so. What are you having for lunch?
I barbecued some chicken yesterday, so it doesn't get better than barbecue chicken on a Weber. There's something about I don't do Weber on my smoker. I'm not going to do Weber on the flat iron skillet. It's got to be on the Weber, man. There's something about charcoal and chicken that works. So anyway. Squirrel. You know what ADHD stands for? ADHD, attention deficit. Hey, donut.
No, here, dummy.
Okay. Yeah, here, dummy. There you go. That works out. Yeah. So anyway, we just wanted to start doing some wrap-ups on Revelation.
I'll be done in a few minutes. I'm almost done.
Here's the thing. Was that ADD?
There's actually nobody inside my house.
I was going to say, or is that old age? Is this dementia or something? No one's home right now. The lights are on, but no one's home, Rob, literally.
Yeah, Tony's at work.
It's so good. We just wanted to wrap up and just talk about stuff, some loose ends and put a little bow on it. What are we going to talk about? Because we literally have no script.
I really wanted us to say, okay, let's do a wrap-up show on the book of Revelation. And let me start by saying, what did you get out of this? What are your primary takeaways? What are some of your key thoughts?
And I have to now expand on that for 45 minutes?
No, we don't have to go 45 minutes. 40.
Okay, good. That pressure's off. Key thoughts. Okay, so for me, I'm not coming into it where I'm having a huge paradigm shift.
Okay. Yep.
In terms of, oh crap, how do I read this book now? Where I'm sure some people they're going through this or they've gone through it and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm having to relearn and unlearn everything.
Yeah. I think those are the ones that left in episode 10 though.
Right. No, because I've talked to a few people who are regular listeners who've been sitting with it. And for them, it's oh my gosh, I'm rethinking how I think about the Bible.
Good.
And so that was me. I had that process however many years ago in my life, 15 years ago or so. So I'm not there. So I got to go through it in a different kind of way. So I think for me, I'm not really trying to take seriously the ethical ramifications of the book.
Okay.
Especially as we've highlighted things like, what does this mean in terms of wealth and possession? What does this mean in terms of stewarding resources? The motive for going after whatever in life, the riches in life. As someone who is recently left my profession or my employment, And now I'm sitting in a spot where like I'm recording this on a Tuesday morning and I have no job to go to today. And I'm trying to figure out what that looks like and going through the very real struggles of earning an income and saying, what do we need to stay afloat? That is a luxury, but what do we need that is just wise to have? Like, how does Revelation inform all those sorts of things as I'm in that decision-making process right now? So like, it's definitely been affecting on a real ethical level.
Let me interject really quickly here. As this goes live the first week of August or so, I will have done several live streams on Thursday night that are available on the Determined Truth YouTube page under the Gospel and the Kingdom playlist, specifically or explicitly looking at Matthew 6 and the Sermon on the Mount and this question of wealth, and then Luke 6, blessed are the poor, and Jesus' statement of give to everyone who asks of you, which is a reference to giving to the poor, because that's the ones who are asking of you. And then Luke 16, the parable of the unjust steward. It's the most difficult parable there is. And the answer to that parable has everything to do with giving and caring for the poor and wrestling with those questions. So I'm actually going to do 2 live streams as you and I are talking on Thursday night this week that'll have gone live back to back. I'm going to do 35 minutes, take a break, and then do another live stream. And so that whole series will be on the Determined Truth YouTube page under the live stream playlist.
So you say this week, so that would be in real time. In our time, it's July the 25th. So if you're listening to this, you're obviously going to be listening to it after that because we're recording ahead of time. Yeah. So go back and look on the YouTube channel for the live stream you did on July 25th.
Yeah, and it'll be titled The Gospel and the Kingdom, and it'll say Luke 6 in the title, and then the next one will say Luke 16 in the title. So you know that those are the ones there. And then Matthew 6 was the one I did last week. So you're looking at that. And because I think that these conversations, because I'm processing it too, Vinny, even though I've been processing the book of Revelation for many more years, but the implications of what you're talking about are just something that I'm processing as well. And like, okay, how do I deal with this? And the reason why I'm doing these live streams, as you and I discussed offline before we started the recording, is because I don't think we can talk about politics and the church, abortion, immigration, taxes, and all these different issues unless we, as Christians, unless we come from a kingdom perspective of what Jesus was talking about and looking at the gospel and the kingdom from Jesus' eyes. And I think the church has radically missed it. I think we've gone sideways to the point I would even say, and I know we have a regular listener here, I'm a little bit safer, that the church looks more like the Pharisees than the church by far, almost unquestionably. Okay, what else? What else struck you?
Those are big ones. I think I just picked up your commentary because it was just released, so I haven't had a chance to go through your commentary yet. But having conversations with you on your idea of love story as opposed to wrath, and that's something that I think it'd be fun to talk about a little bit today.
Okay.
We've obviously had some conversations on here because we've talked about it a little bit in here, but you obviously go deeper with it on the commentary. So that's something where I haven't held to that position, but I'm definitely, I'm open to reading and learning from your perspective. And so that's something more where it's, okay, that's interesting. How does your perspective work? How can I fully understand it? And then try to wrestle with that to say, is that what I'm seeing as well?
Okay.
And then also, how might that work? And this is something that we'll probably flesh out today a little bit more. How could your position work? Is it a separate paradigm that you're looking at, or is that something that could be included with another position, or just wanting to understand that more? Because I think that's something that has come up a lot, even in looking at some of the social media posts you've put or with other people have promoted on your book, and people right away freak out saying there's no wrath. What does he mean? Is he a heretic? But that's what people are reading.
I know exactly.
And to clarify that, I think it would just be helpful to say, okay, how might this new perspective that you have, how does it compare and contrast with the older perspective or traditional perspective, and just what do we do with that?
Isn't it funny though that you say it's a love story and you're talking about a book of the Bible and people are freaking out? Like, okay, where do we go astray with this? For God so loved the world is the essence of the biblical story. Revelation is part of that biblical story. Okay, tell me where I'm off track.
And my thought is, so many people, we all do this, but we bring in our own baggage.
Exactly.
And so there's been other stuff, especially if you look over the last 10 years, especially, there has been a heightened movement in evangelicalism that has wanted to remove the idea of God's wrath altogether. And so it will use language of, hey, God is love. He is not a God of wrath. Therefore, so even in the popular song In Christ Alone, there's that line that says, it's scorned by the ones he came to save, till on the cross as Jesus died, the wrath of God was satisfied. And there's even some hymnals and some evangelical traditions, morely mainline traditions, that have said, no, we don't want to sing about the wrath of God. God's not a wrathful God. And so let's remove that. And so now it becomes this paradigm shift between, then you get the view that runs all the way saying, no, we need to embrace it. We got to overemphasize the wrath of God. And then you get the people say, no, let's underemphasize the wrath of God. So you have these types of conversations popping up. Yeah. And now I think someone hears you saying, oh, Revelation's a love story. It's not about God's wrath.
Interesting. Okay.
Just being in the evangelical world, what I could hear is people saying, oh, Rob's saying this other thing. Yeah. That might not have been anywhere on your mind.
You want me to address that now?
If you want to. Yeah.
Sure. And we'll come back to a couple of other key points later. First thing is, we have to stress that the book of Revelation is about Jesus before we go down these other paths. Secondly, the book of Revelation is about the mission of God's people, that the means through which God does the work of his kingdom is through the people of God, which is what the New Testament and the entire biblical text is about. So Revelation is not saying anything new there. What's interesting is when you write a proposal to a publisher, I usually like to write the book first and then write the proposal later, because I learned so much as I'm writing the book that there's nuances that actually make the book much better than I originally thought it was going to be. And I want to include that in a proposal to the publisher, because it'll help maybe sell the book a little bit better and I'm more likely to get it published. But I knew with the commentary that I couldn't do that because there were going to be certain things that the publisher might want me to do. Do they want me to use my own translation, or do they want me to use the New American Standard Translation or some other translation? They want me to format it this way or that way. And I didn't know how those decisions were going to be made, and I couldn't do all the writing and then have to go redo it all. So actually I did a fair amount of writing, like several drafts, and I just stopped. And I stopped for 6 to 8 months. So the project took 3 years, but I think I stopped for 8 months or more where I didn't do anything on it at all, because I was waiting to hear from a publisher whether it was a yes or a no and what the requirements were going to be. So the point of saying that is, when I started the commentary, then I had written, the publisher said, here's what I'm going to do. The idea of Revelation, a love story, was already there. I already had this idea of a love story, because actually that's my dissertation. My first book, Revelation and the Two Witnesses, which I did almost 20 years ago, that the whole idea of the two witnesses are that the gospel is spread to the faithful witness of the two witnesses. This is Richard Bauckham. So this is elite scholars in the book of Revelation. He's as elite as there is. And he had pointed me onto this in terms of that after the two witnesses are killed and then they rise again after 3 days or 3.5 days, and that the nations fall down and give glory to the God of heaven. And Bauckham argues, as I do in my commentary as well, that is a redemptive falling down and worshiping, that they're being redeemed as a result of the resurrection of the two witnesses. So the argument was, going into the writing of the commentary, that the way the nations are redeemed is to the faithful, loving, sacrificial witness of God's people. I didn't have fully, at that time, when I started it and when I wrote the proposal, I hadn't developed the whole idea that, oh, the seals, trumpets, and bowls aren't really actually about the wrath of God. I hadn't thought of that. Now, I went to the seals, and if you're following along, you've been with us on the podcast, the 7 seals in Revelation chapter 6, of course, chapter 8, verse 1 as well, and verse 5. The 7 seals clearly mirror the Olivet Discourse, the teachings of Jesus in Mark 13, Matthew 24. And so I began to realize, okay, hey, wait a minute, this isn't about wrath. This is just Jesus' way of saying, I'm not coming yet. These things are going to happen. But in Mark 13 and Matthew 24, Jesus is not saying, I'm going to bring earthquakes on people. I'm going to bring famine. I'm going to bring pestilence. He's simply saying those things are going to happen. And in light of the clear parallel with the 7 seals, or at least the first 4 seals, and that sermon in Mark 13 and Matthew 24, it was pretty evident that the seals are not about God's wrath. And of course, the 5th, 6th, and 7th seals are something different. I won't spend the time going into that. And so when I began presenting my thesis about the trumpets and the bowls to a few scholars, I know how the seals work with that the seals are not about God's wrath, but I'd be curious to see how you argued that the trumpets were not about God's wrath in particular, and the bowls.
The bowls specifically are talking about their bowls of wrath. And
as we discussed, I have no problem with that. And let me give the caveat that I've given a few times before, but it's certainly worth repeating. So I hadn't developed that thesis yet. And as I went to the 7 trumpets, I began, okay, what's going on here? And I actually went through, maybe this is what's happening with the 7 trumpets. Okay, maybe it's this. Okay, maybe it's that. And then I began reading a couple scholars, David Barr and Resegui and Barbara Rossing. These are legitimate scholars. And they began saying things that I hadn't thought of before, that nobody else has thought of before. And they started developing the thesis, but they didn't go all the way. And I began realizing, oh, wait a minute, look at what's happening. The seals affect humanity and the trumpets affect creation. And I noticed the parallels with, I won't regurgitate it all right now, but the seals and trumpets are parallel with one another, the way they work. They both have an interlude after the sixth and before the seventh. They both have a 4-3 paradigm. I know the trumpets and bowls often get read together because the trumpets and bowls both have this Exodus imagery. So I began developing this thought of, wait a minute, the trumpets should be read this way. And then as we discussed, the most troubling verse for me, at the end of the seventh trumpet, it says, he's going to destroy those who destroy the earth. But if God's the one doing the trumpets, he's destroying the earth. And I'm like, so how does that verse work? And as we discussed in the podcast, I figured that out. The other thing is the fifth and sixth trumpets, as I argue in the commentary at length, actually allude to Armageddon. Is God actually empowering these demonic beings to wage war, especially when you realize that the war is against the church, it's against God's people. So that's a lot of the process that I began to go through with the seven trumpets and begin to figure out, hey, this isn't actually God bringing wrath. It's God saying, this is what's going to happen because I'm delaying my wrath, because I'm delaying the return of Christ. So again, I have no problem with the return of Christ being a time of wrath. But the seven seals and trumpets was God's answer to the saints saying, how long, O Lord? And the answer, not yet. And unfortunately, not yet means Rome, we'll just say Rome at the time, but obviously the nations of the world, they are going to bring about pestilence and wars and violence and death and famine. And unfortunately, the nations don't repent. And the nations should go, hey, this Christ way of doing things makes sense because there's food for everybody. There's justice for everybody. And some people might be rich, but no one's going to be so poor that they're starving to death. Let's do things Jesus's way. Let's no longer do things Rome's way. Instead, they go, Rome's way is the only way we know. Let's keep doing it. So I think that's what's happening. The seals and trumpets are saying God's delaying his judgment. He's delaying his final wrath. He's delaying the second coming of Christ because the nations haven't been redeemed yet. And then while that happens, the nations of the world are still bringing devastation on creation, devastation on humanity with wars and famines and pestilence, and the rivers turning to blood. Is just symbolizing the destructive chaos. And I think, Vinnie, that we're living through an era where we're seeing this with global warming and with all the devastation that's happening and fires and superstorms and everything else. I think we're actually living through an era where like this makes as much sense now as it probably did back then. When it comes to the seven bowls, I think it's doing somewhat the same thing as the seven trumpets and seals are, but it's also depicted as this final judgment. I don't think it's happening one bowl after another bowl as far as how it plays out in historical time. I think it's narrating a story. And so if you want to say the seven bowls are what happens on Judgment Day, not necessarily sequentially, that's fine. Okay, cool. I'm good with that. And so it is the bowls of God's wrath. They are being poured out, and they're being poured out as a source of justice because you have poured out the blood of the saints and prophets, and God's pouring out his bowls on them. So no problem at all. So the bowls then are God's final wrath and final judgment. And I do believe in a final judgment. As I said all along, I don't believe everyone's saved. I don't believe everyone escapes God's wrath. I don't believe in universalism. There is a final judgment. And if that's what the seven bowls are, that's fine. I think it's more complex than that, as we discussed in our episodes on the bowls, but I'll leave it at that. Does that help, or does that answer your question?
No, that does, because I appreciate that, knowing you, because oftentimes in theological answers, you avoid giving like a direct answer. And and it's just because you're not trying to be a theologian and that sort of thing. But in this case, when I hear you coming out saying, no, this is what I believe, this is what I don't believe, for me, that just shows that that's a true statement. You're not trying to hide anything. You're not trying to play fast and loose. You're not trying to like just smudge something so it doesn't get you kickback or anything. It's like, no, you believe this because I know you, and you don't emphatically state those kind of positions unless you're absolutely there. So I would just say, no, that's super helpful for you to define that. And then also something that we talked about like a long time ago. This is where I'm trying to remember if we talked about it offline or in one of the episodes. What we don't mean, or what you don't mean by wrath, is God's way to temporarily coerce people into believing in him. Because that's one of those views, right? It's God's doing this basically to make people uncomfortable and push them into the kingdom.
And teach them a lesson. So I smote your 9-year-old daughter. Sorry for that. I feel bad about it. But you know what? I hope you learned the lesson that what happened to her doesn't happen to you. You better repent. that doesn't make any sense at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so that whole idea, and I think that's one of the big problems with the end times theology, this popular as end times theology, is it really does make God this evil being sitting up there. He's spewing out wrath and in order to get people to repent. He is threatening them with judgment because there is a final judgment. Adam and Eve, if you eat this, you will die. That's a statement of love. But he's not saying, and I'm going to kill your wife so that those who survive can learn the lesson. No, God is merciful and gracious and loving. I think we have a really warped view of who God is.
And so it's God not merely getting back at the world, but it's the world getting its due for their rebellion, or it's them being given over, to use that kind of language that we see throughout scriptures, them being given over to their sin.
Yeah. And for not, I'm going to twist this. God's giving over his wrath on the people of the world for not believing in the witness and testimony of God, of the people to whom God has sent. Okay. Now, let me twist that, because that puts the burden on us.
Got it.
And one of the problems I have with, or one of the many problems I have with the popular end times theology is we just get to kick back and go, I hope you guys become like us so that you don't have to suffer wrath, as if we're passive observers doing nothing in this. And the biblical text is clearly, go ye therefore to all nations and make disciples, and they'll know you are my disciple if you love one another. Greater love is no one than this, that a man lays down his life for his friends. Husband, love your wives as Christ loved the church and laid down his life for her. The sacrificial life of God's people is what we're called to. And this popular eschatology simply says, well, I'm hoping the rapture comes soon. Oh, let's clap hands, as I've blogged about recently, because the war in Gaza is going so well. Clearly, Jesus is about to return. We're clapping our hands and applauding at catastrophes, at wars, at famines, at earthquakes. These are all allegedly signs of the end times, at what might legitimately be called a genocide in Gaza.
Yeah. And
we're not having mercy and justice and grace and peace. And I have no onus to get up out of my couch and actually do anything, and actually feed people and care for people and serve people and comfort people. And the book of Revelation is a call to God's people to overcome and persevere and follow the Lamb. And the whole Bible is this call. Be imitators of me, Paul says, as I imitate Christ.
That's good. So
I could keep going if you want me to. So if you don't interject, I'm going to go for a while.
Yeah. I just want to, I don't know, maybe bring it to an end point in terms of maybe the person who still has trepidation on that idea of love story. You can absolutely hold to the position of there will come a day where God will come to judge the living and the dead. You could affirm a Nicene Creed, historic Orthodox view of Christianity, and still say, and this book is a love story. It's not one or the other. You're not saying you either have to have this position or that position. In a sense, I would say your position, the love story, it's more of a narrative view where it's looking at why is this happening? Why are we having this conversation to begin with? It truly is that bigger look at not just Revelation, but how it fits into the biblical picture.
Yeah, and by meta narrative, if you're not tracking that language, it's just a narrative that is all encompassing. And so the entire biblical story is enveloped in this narrative of, for God so loved the world, or 1 John says, God is love.
Yeah.
And so when we understand that this whole story has to be framed in this context of God as love, how do the individual parts fit within that story? And so the judgment, and he will come to judge the living and the dead, that's an act of love, because how long, oh Lord, when you going to avenge our blood? It's the justice. So remember, you may not remember because we did this. All right, I'll have to admit, more than a year ago. We start off with Psalm 96 and Psalm 98.
Yeah.
And these Psalms are like, give praise to the Lord, give praise to the Lord, give praise to the Lord. Why? Because he's come to bring justice. And the justice is for us. We are the oppressed. It's about time that God judged the nations of the world for the oppression that they brought upon us. Now, you can also, however, frame that and say, it is still justice and love to the nations upon whom he brings his wrath, because he's valuing them as beings of value. He's acknowledging their human dignity and their human responsibility. And you're made in my image, and you didn't use that, and you didn't do as I commissioned you to do, and therefore you deserve wrath. I think that's an act of love. Now, we're not going to go on the topic here, but does that mean eternal conscious torment or not? I think that's another topic, and we did address that on one of our episodes. Yeah.
That's one of those topics I've avoided doing the deep dive into.
Yeah. Okay, hold on. I got to ask you. We can cut this out of the episode if you don't want it on the episode.
Hey everyone, we want to thank you for joining us on today's podcast. And we want to remind you that everything we provide at Determined Truth is free of charge. And this even includes all of the teaching that Rob does on a weekly basis to pastors in India and around the world. We don't have any supporters that get special behind the scenes access. But we can only do this with the generous support that comes from those of you who can afford to give. So if you would prayerfully consider supporting us with anything from $5 a month or more, we will continue to work hard to challenge the church to be the church. To give, go to determinedtruth.com and click on the Give tab or follow the link in the show notes.
Why? I think I know why I would answer the question. Why have you avoided doing the deep dive?
It's because
This is gonna be so
that,
good.
I know it is. It's not like this is going to affect my paycheck anymore. I would say, so
the truth comes out. No.
And I truly don't have, this is where I stand like on that topic. And so just to give clarification on what we're talking about, the traditional Orthodox view of what happens to the sinner, the person separated from God upon death, is what's known as the eternal conscious torment view, that says all people are designed to live in eternity. The people of God will live with God in the new paradise forever. The not people of God will live in what we would call hell. We could just call it that for simple sake. And that's where they will be living eternally, but there's torment that's happening in hellfire, whatever that means, and they're conscious of it. So this is something that happens continually forever. So this has been the historic Orthodox view.
Yeah, I'm not sure how historic it is, but I haven't studied it enough to know the answer to that question.
It's not merely a Reformation view. Let's say that.
Yeah, it goes back to Dante's Inferno at least, but does it go back to the early Christian church or not?
And that's why I just haven't done enough study on
it
just to speak one way or another. And this is what we talked about probably in Revelation 20, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Or Revelation 19, Revelation 20. Okay. Is what we would call
21.
Was it 21?
I think our conversation was in Revelation 21.
Okay. So the concept of annihilationism is this becomes a secondary view. While this is not heretical, it's an annihilation. It's like what it says. You're annihilated. The people of not God, the enemies of God, they cease to exist. So they're not living in an eternal conscious torment. They cease to exist in their punishment. I remember the first time I came up against this view was against Jehovah's Witnesses, talking with them. And I'm like, oh, that's heresy. And then you start to realize, oh, it's actually not technical heresy. It's what would be known in Christian theology as heterodoxy. So it's not orthodoxy. It's not if you look at an orthodox belief as something that's in the middle of a circle, the beliefs are securely believed there. A heterodox view is it's not outside of the circle, but it's on the borderline of the circle. And what it says is, hey, this isn't how the historic church has defined something, but it hasn't not defined it this way. And so you could be safe. You could believe it, but you're outside of the majority, like surface level way I teach this topic. So the majority of our evangelical churches are going to hold a view of eternal conscious torment. Most of our affirmations of faith in our churches are going to usually say, this is what we believe about the afterlife and the end times. For me, I purposefully haven't dived into this topic because I'll be straight up. I was on staff at a church that in our statement of faith said, this is what we believe about end times. I have no problem believing that in terms of, okay, there's a strong tradition for that. I see why that is held to. I just haven't had a need to define it yet. And so I'll hold to that. Fine. I have no problem based on what I know affirming that. That's been one of the reasons why I haven't dived down.
Because if you did do a dive into it, and if I hear you correctly, and all of a sudden you realize I need to change my position, my job's in jeopardy.
Because at that point, and specifically in our church, because I had conversations with senior leaders about it, that's not something in which they felt warranted some sort of whatever you would want to call it, exception. Yeah. And we made our affirmation of faith pretty fluid, and you could be Calvinist or Arminian, even though we were a Reformed Baptist church. You could be Calvinist and Arminian and affirm to the affirmation of faith. You could be dispensational, covenantal, amillennial, premillennial, and still hold to the affirmation of faith. However, they defined this and they felt, no, this is generally believed enough that you should be able to be here. And so that's where I wanted to have integrity in my job. And
okay, let me comment a couple of things on this. Number one is I would, if we were having a long theological debate, and you know how I feel about theological debates, I would push back a little bit on the use of heterodoxy and orthodoxy and whatever, because the question always becomes who's defining these terms and who gets to establish what's orthodox and what's heterodoxy.
Yeah.
And I think we both agree that neither one of us have done the historical church survey of what the doctrine of hell is in the church historically enough to speak with a lot of authority on
Well,
that.
and this one, I've done enough to know that annihilationism is considered heterodoxy and not orthodoxy.
By, yeah.
Well, and that's by the consensus of evangelical or Protestant scholars.
And that's my next point. And that is evangelicalism does not get to be the one that sets the defining characteristics on it. And I think that's just fair for you and I as evangelicals to recognize that there are brothers and sisters in Christ in the Orthodox Church and in the Catholic Church.
Sure.
And the Orthodox Church is not even one, it's diverse. The next thing is this, and that's the point that I really want to make, and that is when I or Vinnie, when we say something to those of you who are listening and like, I haven't heard that before, a lot of times it's because our leaders are afraid to speak up on these issues.
Mm-hmm.
And they're afraid to speak up on these issues because it affects their paycheck. Now, again, I'm not saying, Vinnie, you're a bad person because I've done it as well. You made a wise decision. I don't want to do the deep dive in this issue because if I do, it may affect my job. And okay, it doesn't matter enough to me to worry about it. I'm good where I'm at. I'm just going to let it go. Okay? The other problem, though, becomes this. You take issues like Israel and Gaza and the war that's going on. So I'm speaking up on the issue, obviously, quite a bit.
Yeah.
And as soon as I speak up on the issue, people aren't looking at what I'm saying. They're just simply saying, this guy's too radical. He's a loose cannon. And let's just be honest. It's hard for me to find a job if I wanted to find a job right now because I've spoken up on so many issues. I've spoken up on the issues of race. I've spoken up on the issues of gender. We're going to be speaking up on abortion. And I don't think I'm going to say anything bad, but I think people are going to go, I don't like what he said. And I'm speaking up on the issue of war and Israel. And understandably, when you're in the pulpit, the pulpit's not the best place to have all these conversations.
Correct.
Because the pulpit it's not a conversation from the pulpit. It's a lecture from the pulpit.
Yep.
And your congregation has too many other issues and too much diversity in your congregation. I knew full well, I used to laugh when someone starts talking about Republican. I'm like, dude, the guy sitting right next to you is a strong Democrat. Do you not understand that? Because I would know as the pastor. And so you can't have those kind of conversations, political conversations from the pulpit. A lot of reasons why. Now, take the book of Revelation now. You probably took Revelation, Vinnie, in your New Testament survey class or something like that, whatever. So
we had 2 weeks on it.
Most seminary students get a couple hours at most on the book of Revelation at the end of a survey course. They might have to do a little bit of reading at the end of a book on the New Testament survey course. And they know it's not about this popular end times dispensationalism stuff. But then they go to a church and they're like, A, I don't know enough to speak with authority on it. And B, I have members of my congregation that strongly believe in the popular stuff. If I speak against it, I'm going to lose them. And I have many other pastoral issues I needed to deal with. They just don't talk about these issues. So all of a sudden now I come out and say, hey, here's what the book of Revelation is saying. The whole scholarly world's in agreement, maybe not in all the details. And again, Michael Gorman gave me a strong review. David De Silva, strong review. Scott McKnight wrote the foreword to the book. These are legitimate evangelical conservative.
That's Mount Rushmore of current scholarship.
It really is, especially on the book of Revelation. But the point of that is, I'm saying is what everybody else is agreeing with, but your pastors aren't saying it because A, they're afraid to, B, they don't feel ready and equipped to do, C, they're making wise decisions to not bring up something that's going to be so divisive in the church. Why address it? There's so many other things to address. Now, and that makes me look like the outlier or us look like the outlier. We're not the outlier. The outlier is the popular end times dispensationalism. That's the outlier, but it doesn't look that way because I think it's 80 and 90 million people have read the Left Behind series. And all of a sudden that becomes the main belief. That is not the main belief. That is the outlier, but it sells good books. I just think that's a valuable lesson, whether it's the doctrine of hell or whether it's abortion or whether it's immigration or whether it's race or any of these controversial issues. You're not going to hear a lot from pastors and pulpits a lot of times for that reason, because they're afraid. Sometimes legitimately.
I was going to say to that point, there can be integrity issues in there in terms of like, why aren't they going after that? Or are they purposely withholding to not to avoid something? On my end, there's only so many things I could do. I was never in a situation where I had to address that. And so I'm like, you know what? I just can't get to it. I'm like, I can't force that one now, and so I'll stay away from it. In areas that I had to do that sort of thing was something like the issue of women in ministry.
Yes.
Coming from a strong complementarian background. And I haven't landed. I don't know where I'm at yet. And it's funny because just studying the topic, I got to a point a couple years ago where I had to study the topic for a few things that were coming up. And I still haven't landed anywhere in terms of saying I am this, which is funny because a lot of people in my tradition assume that I am somewhere and I'm like secretly hiding it. As someone who like, I have no paycheck tied to this, I don't know what I would call myself. But I would say I was forced to study the topic. And this is where, if you're in a church, wherever you're at, if you're a member of a church, listen to, or just pay attention to where your church, like where their values are at and what are the things that they hold on to tightly.
Mm-hmm.
And outside of those core Nicene type things, Trinity, monotheism, like those like core Christian things, what are the things that your congregation holds on so tightly to that no one's even allowed to question it without being accused of being woke or liberal or whatever, or these other pejoratives that we try to throw around to shame people? Because a lot of these things that we've developed, I was thinking about this the other day. The American church has so much free time and so little enemy that we create things and we over nuance and we over parse things that just don't need to be parsed out. Yep. And then we create these clubs that are so tight niched because we had all this time to over define theological constructs. And then if you don't fit within our theological construct, that means obviously you're not faithful to you don't take the Bible seriously, blah, blah, blah. And it's because we have all this time. We don't have anything to do. You're telling me, I have friends who have served as missionaries in China. They don't have time to parse out every aspect of ecclesiological order of who ought to run a church and really nuancing everything, because they're just trying to not get arrested. They're just trying to love their farmer neighbors, and they meet regularly, and they're just shepherding people, and they don't have time to determine the exact qualifications for who could lead the Bible study that week. They're just trying to love people. And we're okay with that over here, like looking at them from a distance, but we would never allow that in our church because over here we have nothing but time. And so we over-define everything and really over-define who's in and who's out. And I think theology is important. It matters, but man, when you have such a structure laid out where you don't allow your staff, and you whether you're on a staff or you're a congregant staff, where they cannot have the freedom to explore topics, dude, what kind of system do you have set up?
Not only that, Vinny, but that results in a congregation that's not willing to think or critique. And so as soon as you or I say something that they're not used to hearing, then we must be the ones that are wrong. It creates that whole fabric. Let me go one step further. So in the live stream series I'm doing on Thursday nights, The Kingdom and the Gospel, whenever you're listening to this on the YouTube channel, Determined Truth YouTube channel, under the playlist, The Gospel and the Kingdom. One of my arguments I'm ultimately trying to make is, hey, this is what the kingdom of God is. Now let's go measure up the evangelical church according to that standard. And I'm not saying everybody in evangelical church or all evangelical churches. I'm saying the movement as a whole. And my answer is, we not only have compromised and not spoken up on these controversial issues, we've actually softened the gospel so much that we've undermined the very gospel itself to begin with as well. We're afraid to speak up on Israel-Palestine. We're afraid to speak up on abortion unless we speak up condescendingly towards people having abortions. Yeah, we're afraid to speak up on immigration. We're afraid to speak up on food. We're on poverty. We're about global warming. We can't speak up on that. Creation, is Adam a real person or not? We can't speak up on any of these issues because people have such dogmatic and dug-in beliefs that we're going to lose them. But we also realized that we need to pacify them in other ways, whether it's being militaristic, whether it's being I'm patriotic. I'm not denying patriotic. We've done things like Christian nationalism. But I think in some of these things, we have undermined the gospel saying, hey, guys, you're supposed to lay down your life for your neighbor. Did you know that? You're supposed to take up your cross and follow Jesus. Did you know that? You're supposed to say Jesus is Lord, not your Ford out in the front or your Chevy, whatever it is. By the way, you guys want to know what idols are? Go out and look at the parking lot. We have 15 white trucks out there. And some of them are idols. The materialism that we're not preaching, you got to be kidding me. We have become, as I said, I don't know if I said this at the beginning of this episode when we were talking beforehand, we have become the Pharisees. We have become wealthy and powerful, and we're not willing to get rid of that wealth and powerful. So the rich young ruler, Jesus says, go sell your possessions. I've kept all the commandments, Jesus. That's what most evangelicals would say. Good. Now go sell your possessions, get to the poor, and come follow me. And he went away aggrieved because he owned much land. What you'll see in Luke's gospel, I think we did a little bit of a podcast on this, and I'll be dealing with this on my Thursday nights. What in Luke's gospel is you got that land, you got that wealth at the expense of somebody else. And I don't think we're ready to ask those questions and answer those questions.
We hope you're enjoying the podcast, and we want to remind you that everything we do at Determined Truth, the podcast, Rob's blog, and our YouTube channel is available on the Determined Truth app. Directions on how to download the app is available in the show notes and on the determinedtruth.com website. Just click on the app tab.
one of the things that really got me thinking more critically on this topic of wealth and power was reading Richard Foster's book, Freedom is Simplicity. It's a fantastic book about how living a simple life is freeing, and living with materialism and all that stuff actually is burdening, and the freedom of simplicity. But one of the chapters, maybe chapter 10 or 11, he has a comment. He says, we always think that the goal is to bring the world's poverty up to our level of existence. We'll get rid of the poor in the world by making them as wealthy as we are.
Yeah.
By making them rich as we are. And he says the problem with that is that there's not enough resources in the world to do that. He says it's not just a matter of bringing up the level of subsistence of the poor. It's about bringing our level of existence down, because there's only way you can do that. And all of a sudden you begin realizing, the only way we can have the extreme wealth we have, and even middle-class people like you and me, the wealth that we have is because somebody else is going without.
Yeah.
And that you begin to realize, okay, that I think is antithetical to the gospel, because Jesus said, give to the one who asks of you. And we'll talk about this in other settings. I'm not saying you can't have wealth. I'm saying that we need to make sure that the poor have at least what they need to survive, at least food, at least clothing, at least shelter. That's what the gospel of the kingdom is about. And that's what I'm talking about on Thursday night. So anyway, we segued there. Any other thoughts in terms of the book of Revelation that really hit you? I think I've said mine. Maybe I'll repeat mine at the end, but what are some of the key takeaways that you have?
No, that was a lot of it. What we talked about, I think it probably covers a lot of what's there. This stuff always brings up, especially in regards to your commentary, this brought up just some extra stuff in terms of how we encourage and shepherd folks within the church. This is going to be one of those polarizing topics and unsafe topics, and people guard walls go up anytime Revelation comes up, because it's, can I trust this guy or can I not trust this guy? What are they teaching? Because they're either right or wrong, and blah, blah, blah. My question for you, as someone who's just written a commentary, you've obviously written extensively now on Revelation and end time stuff. So what is this, your fourth, fifth book on a topic related to this side of things, eschatology and Revelation? So a couple questions, starting with a commentary, because people who know you and support you, they might want to go out and buy the commentary right away, which is like, hey, cool, buy the commentary. That helps. But who is this the best tool for? So that's the first question I would ask you would be, is this commentary for the layperson? And I guess we'd have to define what do you mean by layperson?
Not really. And so I'm actually going to put together a curriculum that will package for churches and church leaders. And I'll include some videos, like 10-minute videos. And I'll include, hey, listen to these podcasts that we've already done and follow the Lamb. And I'm going to package it to churches to say, here's how you can teach through the book of Revelation using my resources. All of it will be free of charge. If you want to give a donation to the ministry, you can. If you want to have me come on a Zoom call or want me to travel there and you want to give a donation, that's great. If I travel, you can cover my expenses. And then if you take a love offering so I can make some money, that's great too. But otherwise, it's all for free. And what I'm going to do is simply say, the congregation should be reading the book of Revelation and follow the Lamb.
Your other book
leaders,
on how a primer to read.
Yeah, Follow the Lamb is my other book. Okay. It's called Follow the Lamb, a guide to reading, understanding, and applying the book of Revelation. And then the leaders in the church, whether it's a Bible study leader, the teachers, pastors, seminary students, professors, college students, that's who the commentary is for. The commentary is really meant for the church and the leaders. It's 400 and something pages. Yeah. And I don't like writing 400-page books, but if you're reading a commentary and Revelation's got 22 chapters. Yeah. It's just going to happen. So it's only meant for the leaders primarily, for them to have it as a resource. And then I'll give a resource guide with videos and everything else for the leaders who are preparing to lead their congregation or their Bible study group or their community through the book of Revelation using the resources that I provided. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's a good one. So even to talk about that, you're available to visit, to do lectures, seminars, even pulpit supply, preach on a Sunday morning or so on any topic, but specifically this topic right now. So if there's a congregant someone who listens to this podcast and they maybe want to put you in touch with their pastor, and that gets weird when people are like, hey, you should have this guy in. I know that people who've worked in churches, we've had congregants come to us and say, hey, we love this guy, can we get him? Yeah, exactly. that can always get weird. But what would be an appropriate way for someone listening to this to have a conversation with their pastor about this topic?
I would simply say, pointing out the resources that are available. Hey, you should check out this podcast. It's really good. Or his book, Follow the Lamb, is really good. And if you like that, then he just wrote a comment in the book of Revelation. And then when I get this curriculum guide together, say, hey, here's what he's got. It's all free. So you can use this. And We're going to discuss leadership in the book of 2 Corinthians in our next series coming up. And one of the questions is, promote yourself at a job interview. Is that boasting? What do we do with this? And how do we work with this? Giving somebody's credentials are essential. You can't just simply go to your pastor and say, hey, you should listen to this guy. He's great.
Yeah.
He's got a radio show. He's self-trained. Yeah, probably not. So giving the credentials and my training and my education and where I've taught at, that would be helpful as well to say, hey, this guy's in the fly-by-night thing. And the fact that Scott McKnight wrote the forward to the book, and Michael Gorman and David De Silva and Carolyn Custis James are the ones who endorsed it, as well as others. I think it's important for them to know that those people are endorsing the book as well, not just you.
Yeah. And then you're available, like you're an easy guy to access. So like you would be more than happy to have a conversation, Zoom, phone, whatever with.
I do regularly, actually. I have Zoom meetings on a regular basis with some Bible study groups and some churches on Saturdays or weeknights or whatever. So I speak to them. They come up, hey, we want these questions, or can you teach on this? And it's not the book of Revelation always. I'm doing the Gospel of Mark for one group right now. So I do meet with them and on a regular basis. And I don't know. I think maybe they support me. I don't know. I don't know who gives and who doesn't give because I don't look at that part of the thing there. So I'm available for churches to do that with as well. So
another question on this is, as a lay person, especially, when do I ask the question, oh, is this commentary in Revelation mill or pre-mill, or is it dispensational? When do we go after reading a resource that aligns with our perspective or doesn't align with our perspective? And when do we just seek after good and different scholarship?
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that question. I don't like those questions. I don't like it when we do these things. We're not challenging ourselves to think out of the box. That's why we've done a couple episodes on some of the popular stuff to say, hey guys, there's a problem with the popular stuff. So now you need to go somewhere else. But if you're only thinking in that box and you're not willing to get out of that box, I don't know how to help you anyways. Yeah, read stuff and give it a try. If you're talking to somebody on the issue of immigration, I've brought it up a few times. Okay, great. Strong borders. I get it. National defense, really important, especially because we're bombing people all around the world. We have a lot of people that want to bomb us back. I get it. No problem. But we also need to listen to the people on the border. Why are you trying to get through? What's going on? What are your stories? And hear their stories and figure out, hey, is there a way to do this? That's just, and there is, by the way. The United States has a great program for allowing people to come through and not come through. They're just being inundated at the border. Start listening to other viewpoints. Start listening to other people and talking to them. You might not change your view, but you might have a little bit more respect for the other side. You might go, I used to think you guys were all idiots, but now I don't agree with you, but I don't think you're all idiots. And that's a really important place to get to.
It's practicing intellectual honesty. It's practicing avoiding living in what we call echo chambers.
It's loving your neighbor, listening to your neighbors to love them.
Yeah. This past Sunday, I visited a church that was outside of my normal church tradition. And I did it with some friends as I'm seeking a new church to be a part of. And it was very charismatic. It was something where, for me, I'm a Reformed dude. So I would have felt much more comfortable in something with a liturgy or something like that. And so lots of charisma, lots of things like that. And I'm just like, man, this is so outside of my comfort zone. And this isn't a place where I would land. But it's also recognizing that God is bigger than my comfort zone. And I don't need to anathematize this congregation of faithful saints just because I wasn't comfortable there. I think there's something to be said for that, to recognize that God is bigger than my tradition. And there's still plenty that I learned and experienced fellowshipping with this congregation this past Sunday. And so I just think we need to have more charity in general and how we look at the body of Christ.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And more charity with non-Christians too. I think we really do.
Yeah, cool. Hey, that was an interesting talk on all things this. How many more episodes? Is this it for Revelation? Are we done now?
This is it. Okay. We're going to start moving through the rest of the New Testament. We're going to do 2 Corinthians, and we're going to have another episode, I think, just discuss, hey, this is where we're going from here. And here's what Determined Truth is doing and the resource that we have available, and how you guys who are listening to us can help the resources and help get the word out. Because as we said in this discussion, that there's a lot of people that just are afraid to speak. They're either not well equipped to speak, or they're in a context that they just can't speak, or they're in a context where they're afraid to speak. And so basically you and I are two homeless bums who don't have a job. So
we're not homeless, but we are bums.
So cast a little vision, tell you what we're doing, tell you about all the resources that we have, and how you can partner with us.
So right now, as we wrap up, please don't turn it off yet. We seriously need help on something, because we really want this podcast. We need to get more listeners. It affects you guys. We have consistent listeners each week that listen to this podcast, which means it affects you and you appreciate it. this is a way that you could seriously help us out. Like I just pulled up.
Why am I afraid of where this is going?
It's because we're going to do. Yes, because for years we've talked about how you and me are going to do the Men of Determined Truth calendar, and we're going to do a photo shoot.
I knew I was supposed to be afraid. Okay, go ahead, finish.
No, but I just pulled up the Apple Podcast app, and we have not had a comment for a year, over a year.
Yeah.
And seriously, and there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 comments on there. Come on, guys, help us out. Please help us out. Go like right now.
It helps the algorithms when you make the comments.
It helps the algorithm. Yeah.
Yep.
And so if you could like seriously stop the right when we're done right now, go into your app. If you're on Apple, do however many stars you think it's worthy and just leave some sort of review. It could just be one.
No
sentence.
less than 7 stars.
Yeah. No. Exactly. That would help us out. If you guys could do this right now, this is a team effort, man. We're here, we're teaching, and you're here.
Borrow
to help,
your spouse's phone. Borrow your kid's phone.
Great idea. Do it.
Borrow your neighbor's phone. Borrow the guy in the subway next to you. Hey, can I borrow that for a second? And just give comments from every one of those phones. Rate 7 stars on every one of them, and leave good comments.
Exactly. If you can't
Rob
find the
Vinnie
7 stars, just do the
made
5.
for radio. Just things like that.
Hashtag ugly faces. But I'm looking, according to this, there's 322 episodes up here. Come on. We only have 5 reviews. Come on, guys, help us out. So do that for us.
Do your job.
And our next episode is going to be on spiritual abuse and pastors who berate their congregants.
That was Bill Belichick. That was Bill. Just do your job. That wasn't spiritual abuse.
No, if it was Bill Belichick, he'd find a way to cheat. So how's that going to work out for you there, buddy?
Oh, okay. Maybe we should find a way to cheat.
Nice.
All
right, everyone. Hope this was a good, interesting, different type of episode. This is fun. Hey, we know script and we made it through without ADD hijacking. So good job, Rob. That's I didn't say totally. It wasn't a total success. All right, everyone. Catch you guys next time. Anything else? That's it. Bye.
I want to thank you for joining us on today's podcast, and we would love for you to share the work of Determined Truth with others. Please follow this podcast and give a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Your review will go a long way towards helping others find this podcast. Then share it with others so that we can get the word of the gospel of the kingdom to more people.